I did what I did for the good of the realm.
The realm? Do you know what the realm is? It's the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies. A story we agreed to tell each other over and over till we forget that it's a lie.
But what do we have left once we abandon the lie? Chaos. A gaping pit waiting to swallow us all.
Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.
Petyr Baelish, or Littlefinger, has had one of the biggest influences on the events of Game of Thrones. In fact, he might just have the biggest. It was his scheming that kicked off the conflict between the Starks and the Lannisters, and we wouldn't exactly have a show without it. He's responsible for the capture of Ned Stark,
I did warn you not to trust me.
the death of Joffrey Baratheon, at least in part,
Always keep your fools confused. If they don't know who you are or what you want, they can't know what you plan to do next.
the murder of Lysa Arryn, selling Sansa Stark to House Bolton,
You're not marrying Roose Bolton. No, you'll be marrying his son and heir, Ramsay.
and not to mention, his Knights of the Vale win the Battle of the Bastards for Jon Snow. So why is it that a character responsible for all of that is taken out in a way as simple as this? Hello everybody, I'm Miguel, and welcome back to another installment of Fireside Chats. I know last time I did one of these, I was counting down some of my favorite movies. I did 5 in the first video, and I was going to do a part 2 with another 5, but I figured before I get to that, I would address a problem I'm having with one of my favorite shows right now. Game of Thrones is a fantasy series currently airing on HBO, based on the book series A Song of Ice and Fire, written by George R.R. Martin. Unlike most fantasy programs, Thrones prides itself on delving into the more political aspects of its feudal society, thus falling more in line with something like The Godfather than The Lord of the Rings. It's this focus on intrigue, conspiracy, and grim imperialistic reality that make it stand out from the bunch, and have crowned it one of the most popular shows on television today. And while I may have been able to forgive the pacing and writing issues in the later seasons, I've had more issues with the show this season than I have before. But what does Littlefinger have to do with any of this? To really understand this, we're going to have to go back, analyze Littlefinger's core characteristics and history, and connect those with the morals and philosophies of the show so far. Littlefinger, or Petyr Baelish, unlike many of the noble and lord characters on the show, came from more humble beginnings. He came from a small house with little wealth or power. When he realized at an early age his physical frailty wouldn't allow him to take what he wanted with force, he used his wit, and with admirable savviness, ascended upwards in status without ever so much as drawing a sword. He was enigmatic, and made his motives unknown so he could continue to be so and continue to accumulate influence. With such commendable achievements in psychological prowess, you'd be correct in assuming that when he did finally bite the dust, he'd be killed in a way not only shocking, but as the result of a scheme so clever he couldn't even figure it out. But for some reason, when it does happen this season, it just felt so quick. There's a certain hollowness to it, and I even noticed it watching it live. And I didn't feel the way I thought I should or the show wanted me to. And after further analysis, I can only really figure out or surmise that it's because of the shift in focus the show's been taking the last 2 seasons. With winter finally arriving and the White Walkers coming, I expected that the show would eventually shift its focus to Great War and all of the time and energy would be focused on that plot. But I didn't expect, even after all of these seasons of building it up, that when it did finally happen, the show's greater narrative and themes would suffer. By moving the story so forward so suddenly away from the backdoor politics and conflicts of earlier seasons, many characters were left scrambling for a purpose. Characters like Varys, Olenna, and more significantly, Littlefinger, were sidelined in favor of the great battle with the army of the dead. It's almost kind of shocking. Characters like Tyrion, Daenerys, and Jon were always focal points of the narrative, but their exploits were always balanced out with the rest of the casts. There was always a balance to this extensive world, and the occurrences within it. It wasn't ever a show with a main character, or characters. And don't get me wrong, in a sense, I do know what they were going for, and I get why they killed him off. He's been a mentor to Sansa for the past few seasons, teaching her how to play the Game of Thrones. And with her finally getting him killed off, it does kind of show her overcoming a hurdle and taking initiative for herself, and she's done being a scared little girl and she's finally entering the playing field with the rest of the cast. However, if that were completely the case, she should have been solely responsible for his demise. If they did it for Sansa's growth, as I theorized, having Bran and Arya play such big roles in it does feel a bit cheap. And I get that the South's political games don't work in the Honorable North. But still, there had to be a better way to execute this idea that makes sense to his character and doesn't stifle the growth of hers. This does kind of lead into a much larger issue with the season. I get that for the past 6 seasons they've been expanding this giant world, and there's been a million subplots going on, more characters introduced, and eventually when the White Walkers arrived they were going to be brought together, that the world had to retract. But everything with this slashed episode count, with them only having 2 seasons left to finish this story, you can't help but notice that things, when they do happen, they do feel a little bit rushed. So look at Jon and Dany's romance, for example. It's been something that fans have theorized would happen since almost the beginning, and they have wanted to see it. But when we did finally get it, it just didn't feel real. They weren't given enough time to grow and connect in a natural way as many on the show have. And as a result, it suffers major. By trading natural progression for spectacle, many storylines and character arcs were botched, and Baelish arguably got the worst part of the bargain. Littlefinger, the man who rose from nothing and worked his way up to sitting at a table with the most important people in Westeros, was relegated to manipulating 2 young girls to bicker. It felt like a major step down, and we now know why. The showrunners felt he served his purpose to the greater narrative, that in the grand scheme of things, his tricks and games no longer mattered, that eventually, all they could do was kill him off and move forward, like it was nothing. Now, this does happen all the time, but Littlefinger's death, you can make an argument that not only was it more impactful for the show overall, but it is definitely more tragic in a meta-narrative sense. With him, more than just a good character died. Gone are the days of moral ambiguity, of shaky alliances, of plots and schemes and heartbreak and betrayal and everything his character represented. The second winter arrived, Game of Thrones became tragically simple. It became a crowd pleaser. Instead of embracing the moral grays and the realism the show boasted as a factor in its uniqueness, as its major selling point, it boiled everything down into a simple tale of Jon and Dany versus Cersei and the White Walkers. Of good and evil. Does this mean Game of Thrones is bad or is getting bad? I don't think so. It's still a lot better made than most television, and it's still a pretty solid season overall, but by changing things up so drastically, even though it is still a good show, a well-made fantasy series, it does lose a little bit of its soul. It loses what made it special to begin with. Maybe if this is all going somewhere, maybe this can address existential panic in the way the genre hasn't yet. Maybe it's a deconstruction of the political system and commentary on how none of these things matter in the long run, because death and mortality comes for us all. And while this all may eventually work out, I don't know if the show's new direction has got me on board just yet. For now, the show just feels empty. Alright everybody, I want to thank you very much for watching. I put this video together relatively quick. I did plan on doing part 2 of the movies I love instead, but after watching the season finale and seeing people melt down, either love it or hate it, I did think that it would be a good time to address it before it gets too late. And we will be uploading more content very soon. We have a few things in the works, but I'm just saying now there will be a period where we won't be posting for maybe a good week, because we are going on a cruise, and obviously from there we can't really post to YouTube. So what we're going to try to do is maybe record something or write something before we go and have it ready to upload or film as soon as we come back. And that's really it. Thank you guys for sticking around. Thank you for your patience. And as always, remember to like the video, share, and subscribe. If you have any feedback, leave it in the comments. Maybe suggest some topics for me to cover in the future. And as always, if you do like this format, let me know and I will continue to work on some. And thank you for watching. And I'll see you all next time.